Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. There are some quotes I'd like to start with. Give the young men a place in the village, or they'll burn it down to feel its warmth. Every act of creation is first an act of destruction. Some men just want to watch the world burn. You see words like these tossed around a lot lately. There's a lot of dissatisfaction in the world, and the levels of both sympathy and empathy are at an all-time low. But there's good news if you're a writer. Now is the best time to study those quirky little misanthropes who would burn everything down and dance on the ashes. Yes, this video is a bit topical, but it's also one I really wanted to do because some of the most popular characters of the last century have wanted nothing more than to burn everything down. It's not always for no reason. Sometimes the characters have debatably good reasons. It really comes down to what side of power you're on. So let's take a peek into the mind of the fictional and very real people who want to watch the world burn. This is probably going to be a longer video. But first, a small plug for my own work. I write some odd stuff about odd topics. One of which, the world burned down in a more figurative sense. If you would like to read a story about what could happen after the world ends and learn a bit about homesteading, pick up my book, Hapless Homesteader. It has been referred to in reviews as cozy post-apocalyptic. I imagine it would be a good place to be cozy in. Link to that book and my other works is in the description below. So let's start off with a study, because why not? Some people just want to watch the world burn. The prevalence, psychology, and politics of The Need for Chaos. Authored by Kevin Arsenault, Timothy B. Gravel, Mathis Osmundson, Michael Bang Peterson, Jason Reifler, and Thomas J. Soto. I actually got through those names a lot easier the fourth time I said them. Also, wow, this has more authors than your average AI slop being dumped onto Amazon. I'm going to tell you right now, some of you are not going to like this article. It's written with a bit of a slant, and there's probably going to be parts you go, well, no duh, it's obvious that's what this means, but stick with me. Also, this is not a professional assessment of this article. Well, this video will be monetized, so in a way, it kind of is. I will say I'm not a psychiatrist, a psychologist, or any form of doctor that studies human behavior. I'm a guy who reads books and rants about stories and things affecting my entertainment. But science types need to get used to laymen like me looking at their work with an untainted eye. I will tell you right now, this study is not entirely unbiased, but then none of us are. Let's start with the abstract. I won't quote the whole study, but it's got some good insights into the topic we're covering today. People form political attitudes to serve psychological needs. Recent research shows that some individuals have a strong desire to incite chaos when they perceive themselves to be marginalized by society. These individuals tend to see chaos as a way to invert the power structure and gain social status in the process. Analyzing data drawn from large-scale representative surveys conducted in Australia, Canada, the United Kingdom, and the United States, we identify the prevalence of need for chaos across Anglo-Saxon societies. Using latent profile analysis, we explore whether different subtypes underlie the unidimensional construct and find evidence that some people may be motivated to seek out chaos because they want to rebuild society, while others enjoy destruction for its own sake. We demonstrate that chaos seekers are not a unified political group, but a divergent set of malcontents. Multiple pathways can lead individuals to want to watch the world burn. This article is part of the theme issue, The Political Brain, Neurocognitive and Computational Mechanisms. To summarize and paraphrase, they studied different groups in the Anglosphere to show a link between groups of people and ideologies and wanting to watch the world burn. They concluded that even though we're seeing a lot of these people, between 2018 and 2021 when the study was conducted to when it was published, it wasn't a unified effort but independent actors with aligning goals. I believe in that they are pretty much correct, but we'll analyze as we go. On to part 1. Political observers and scholars are sounding alarm over increasing polarization between political parties, the emergence of populist movements and leaders, the circulation of misinformation, hostile interactions on social media, and rising levels of actual political violence. While traditional forms of political activism in Western democracies focus on winning power and support through conventional means provided by the political system, these emerging forms of activism seek to disrupt the existing system altogether. As Alfred the Butler, a character in The Dark Knight, explains in the quote above, some people want to tear down existing social and political institutions rather than build them. Prior research links current-day disruptive activism to experiences of social marginalization and rising economic inequality. At the same time, however, not everyone who feels marginalized has a desire to watch the world burn. In fact, an emerging line of research suggests that these highly disruptive sentiments, referred to as a need for chaos, are contingent on a particular set of psychological dispositions, an intense desire for social status. Individuals vary in the degree to which they crave status, and, when excluded, individuals who possess an intense desire for status are more likely to view disruption and chaos as a viable strategy for obtaining the status that they crave. Accordingly, status-obsessed yet marginalized individuals may find it more attractive to disrupt the entire social hierarchy altogether, rather than to engage in a slow, seemingly futile climb up the social ladder. That's a lot of words to say that a lot of people feel left out of the current hierarchies and don't feel represented. That there's not enough spaces at the top for all the elite aspirants. And even many normal people feel disenfranchised to the point that they would rather see the system burn than to slowly try to fix a system they feel excluded from. This has led to a rise of populist parties in Western countries and even political violence. It's funny how politicians can see supply and demand in everything and even cite it when the economy is bad, but can't see it in their own profession or in their own constituencies. This is one of those no-duh moments. Of course, if you get a large number of people who don't feel represented by the current system, they will seek to rebuild it or tear it down. I'm not going to go into the political situations of that time. There are lots of videos on 2018 through 2021 if you want to know. Moving on. Need for chaos is defined as a desire for a new beginning through the destruction of order and established structures. To measure individual differences in such desires, Peterson, Osmundson, and Arsenault developed and validated a battery of 8 items that reflect individual differences in desires for a new beginning, the destruction of established structures, and upsetting the established order, e.g., degree of agreement with items such as, I think society should be burned to the ground, and sometimes I just feel like destroying beautiful things. This need for chaos scale, henceforth known as NFC chaos scale, which I'm not going to call it, is highly predictive of a heightened orientation towards disruptive behaviors such as political violence and sharing of hostile political content. Psychologically, the need for chaos is best conceptualized as a characteristic adaptation. An example, a latent attitude that is made manifest in the interplay between particular personality traits and particular social contexts. Consistent with this view, prior research shows that a need for chaos is highly correlated with, but distinct from, status-oriented personality traits such as the dark triad of Machiavellianism, psychopathy, and narcissism. Furthermore, and again consistent with the characteristic adaptation perspective, research shows that such personality traits are particularly predictive of a need for chaos in contexts involving deprivation and exclusion. In contrast, status-oriented individuals have consistently been found to engage in so-called system justification when deprivation is absent. In this context, systematic injustices are explained away as a reflection of individual choice. Figure 1 illustrates this theoretical model. Need for chaos is activated by the confluence of status-oriented personality traits and the presence of perceived marginalization. In this regard, it is also important to note that while chaos-oriented individuals are triggered by thwarted status aspirations, chaos seekers do not need to be deprived in an absolute sense. In fact, previous research suggests that a need for chaos is more widespread in middle rather than lower income groups. So we get some definition of terms and what they're looking for. The Need for Chaos, or NFC Chaos Scale, which, honestly, I prefer the term Need for Chaos, but I'm looking at this from a how it sounds perspective. NFC Chaos sounds like something internet people would try to sell you as some Bitcoin derivative. Next, we are told that they believe a need for chaos is not directly related to the dark triad of traits of Machiavellianism or generally being a psychopath. I hear thousands of Joker fans gnashing their teeth at this. But that a need for chaos is more closely associated with individuals seeking status. They don't even have to be denied the status they're seeking, though that is a common reason. They just need a cause to justify their want for chaos. To put it in a real-world example, think of the Just Stop Oil protesters. A bunch of middle-class kids and activists with nothing better to do than disrupt everyone else's lives. This is a long way of saying many people seeking chaos either feel left out or unheard, or just come from bored middle-classers. Moving on. While existing work has identified chaos seeking as a measurable social strategy and demonstrates how it leads to disruptive political behavior, we know much less about who chaos seekers are. The aim of the present manuscript thus provides the first comprehensive cross-national assessment of the profile of a core challenge facing Western democracies, that a number of individuals are so fed up with the current system they would rather see it burned to the ground rather than reformed. In doing so, it seeks to answer 3 descriptive questions. First, what is the prevalence of the need for chaos? What proportion of the public in modern democracies support burning it all down? The media and scholarly attention to disruptive behaviors such as sharing fake news may suggest that a craving for chaos is exceptionally widespread. Indeed, prior research argues that individuals who are in a high need for chaos may comprise a significant minority of the American population. Yet at present, this question has only assessed the United States, which is notable in its high levels of polarization and inequality relative to other industrialized countries. Here we provide comparative evidence by relying on representative surveys in 4 English-speaking democracies that vary significantly in their levels of polarization and inequality: Australia, Canada, the United Kingdom, and the United States. We also contribute in terms of measurement. While previous research has demonstrated that the need for chaos is a measurable, unidimensional concept, its nature as a characteristic adaptation suggests that there are many potential pathways that may trigger this need. To explain this, we add to existing research by exploring whether there are different subtypes within the overarching category of chaos seekers. If you've paid attention to the news, some of that may sound familiar. This study has not been spared the political jargon and leanings of its time. I will give them credit, they're trying really hard. But yes, there is a large number of people who have a high need for chaos. I do appreciate that they decided to do this study across several different nations. I also get what they mean by high levels of polarization and inequality relative to other industrialized nations when talking about the US. The US has its own brand of politics you don't see in the rest of the world. I chalk that up to the fact that we're heavily armed. We took the theory of mutually assured destruction to heart. It's not always the case, but people's ability to speak their minds comes heavily from their ability to match violence for violence. It's a weird give and take. It's one of those macro-micro things. Most people, like most countries, don't want to take a shot at another person if they may be answered in kind. But I'm straying a bit. As their first goal, they're looking for how many people have the burn it all down mentality, and they touch on their methods for finding this. Moving on. Second, it is unclear how unrepresentative individuals high in the need for chaos are in terms of demographics and personality. Are all groups equally likely to hold a segment of radicals, or are particular groups more likely than others to contain those with such attitudes? While some evidence exists that the need for chaos is distinct from other malevolent traits, it is crucial to replicate this finding in countries outside the United States. Finally, we know little about the political aims and behaviors of chaos seekers beyond their orientation to disruption. Are they a uniform political group in the sense they share a set of ideological positions and issue attitudes? Or, in contrast, does chaos seeking constitute a thin ideology that weakly links a politically diverse and uncoordinated set of individuals who want to watch the world burn for very different reasons? Prior exploratory analyses suggest that individuals high in a need for chaos can be found in the extremes of both political right and left, but a broad assessment of their political inclinations on standard inventories of political behaviors and attitudes has not yet been done. The second thing they want to test for is if this is more common in one group or if it's spread out over many groups. They do the typical song and dance about how every group has radicals, and they do. They also want to look at if a need for chaos is distinct from other negative traits. Finally, they want to look at if there are any common views held by chaos seekers. Are they a group brought together by a unifying ideology, or a bunch of randos who simply share a common goal? We then get a bit of horseshoe theory, and they mention areas that haven't been adequately explored. The second section, which I'm not going to read you, is their methodology. They talk about what they did and why. If you want to read the study in full, you can check the link in the description. It's an interesting study, but I like my videos to be done in one take, and this is already going to challenge that. Moving on to Section 3. I will be reading the abbreviations as the words they're meant to represent. Section 3. Who is high in need for chaos? In this section, we turn our attention to exploring the correlates of our need for chaos latent class profiles. Is it the case that individuals who fall in the high chaos profiles are different from those who fall in the rebuild profile? If so, this may indicate that these individuals' craving for chaos has roots in different motivations. We explore this question by investigating whether demographic characteristics and political ideologies contribute to variance in the need for chaos latent profiles. Our analytical approach involves using multinomial logic to regress the latent profile categories on measures of demographic characteristics and political ideology, while controlling for Big Five personality traits and racial categories relevant to each country. It is important to control for Big Five personality traits because need for chaos may reflect an uncontrolled personality prototype, a pattern where someone is low in agreeableness and conscientiousness and high in neuroticism. The data shown in Section 3 of the electronic supplementary material offers some support for this possibility. We focus on demographic characteristics, gender, age, and education, that previous research has found to be linked to perceived marginalization and the motivation to acquire status, both of which are associated with the need for chaos, with respect to gender and age. Psychological studies often conceptualize status seeking as part of young male syndrome. Education may also be important because it has become a major fault line in Western democracies, as those without a college degree often feel left out and pushed aside in post-industrial knowledge economies. So they're letting us know a bit of why they're doing this. If you don't know what the Big Five personality traits are, I will leave a link with a more detailed description in the description of this video. But basically, they're openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. They're controlling for these traits because they believe they're not the full cause of the need for chaos, and in this case, I agree. They specify the demographics they're going to be working with, which are age, gender, and education. They state they're taking into account young men's want to gain status as part of human nature, though they don't use those words exactly. But they also believe that education will be important as a major dividing line in our current system. If you've been looking for a job without your $100,000 participation certificate, you'll understand what they mean. They go on to tell us the demographic characteristics they're going by. These are all fair things to account for, as they are major dividing lines. Age specifically, as that would help narrow down if this could be historical or opportunity-based or not. It's not a clincher, but it does help. I also want to note I disagree on the US being a knowledge-based economy. We are still very much a product and service-based economy, as the world has become painfully aware in recent months. Just because you outsource your labor to somewhere else does not mean you've removed the need for products and services from your economy. But I'm straying off the main topic. Moving on. The results of the multinomial logit analysis show a clear pattern across all 4 countries. Men, and young men, are more likely to be classified as rebuild or high chaos. See the electronic supplementary material for results. Yet, as Table 3 shows, the relationship between age and need for chaos appears conditional on education. This table shows the predicted probabilities generated from the multinomial logit models where we interacted education with indicators for generation cohorts: Silent, Boomer, Generation X, and Millennial generation. We focus on generation cohorts because trends in political alienation reflect political and historical events or periods which affect all members of a population in a similar fashion. For the most part, individuals with higher levels of education are more likely to fall in the low chaos category than individuals with lower levels of education across generational cohorts. There are some exceptions to this pattern, particularly in Australia, where education does not seem to discriminate in the low chaos category very much. In contrast, relative to more educated individuals, less educated individuals seem to be drawn to the rebuild category and to a lesser extent the high chaos category. Australia offers yet another exception to this pattern, with more educated individuals gravitating to the high chaos category at a higher rate than those with less education. Turning our attention to generational differences, we do not observe a large or consistent difference across cohorts with respect to rebuild or high chaos. A quick note here. One of the reasons you probably see an exception in Australia for low education individuals is because of Australia's attitudes towards blue-collar work. It's an interesting topic, but to summarize, and from what I understand, blue-collar work isn't looked at with the same stigma it is in other Western countries. I also think they misstated something, because if I'm looking at the data correctly, the higher educated people have more people in high need for chaos. Maybe I'm reading that wrong, but I've read it a few times, so maybe they misspoke. There's a bit of a war between those with 4-year degrees and those without, mainly because if you don't have a 4-year degree, you won't be considered for many jobs. It's not just jobs that should require such a formal education. I remember trying to apply to Enterprise, the rental car company, a decade ago. They wanted a 4-year degree to work as a customer service representative. The job didn't even pay more. There are other people who analyze current hiring practices, and I'm not going to do that here. So yes, as they suspected, men, mostly young men, are more likely to want to rebuild society or have a desire for high chaos in the system. What is the real defining characteristic on this is higher education. Millennials, sorry Gen Z, you weren't part of this study, with a lower education background had the highest score in medium chaos for the US, while Generation X in the same areas scored the highest in high chaos. However, the educated in the US have a greater number of high chaos individuals. This calls back to the point about many high chaos individuals being bored middle classers. Regardless, the greatest number of individuals wanted low chaos. This is because most people want stability. Sadly, low chaos and rebuilding are not what should concern established individuals. It's the high chaos. If all other things are equal, it takes a shockingly low percentage of a population to overthrow a system. Again, that's assuming all other things are equal, like production, organization, and armament. Again, that brushes up on another topic and not entirely why we're here. I don't like that they combined high chaos and want to rebuild, as I feel it misrepresents what they were going for, but I may just be taking something different from the study. Moving on. Next, we explore whether ideology influences whether people gravitate towards high chaos. Across all nations, respondents were asked to place themselves on an 11-point ideology scale, which we recode into 5 categories ranging from far left to far right. Table 4 shows the predicted probabilities generated from the same multinomial logit models that generated Table 3. We set the other variables in the model such that these are specifically the probabilities for a male without a college degree who falls in the boomer generation with average scores on the Big 5 personality traits. Across all 4 countries, individuals categorized as high chaos are also more likely to consider themselves to be on the political right. This suggests that there is indeed an overlap between right-wing populism and a need for chaos. Alternatively, some of the dynamics occasionally attributed to right-wing populism, e.g., circulation of misinformation and preference for strong leadership, may, in fact, reflect desires for chaos among some on the right wing rather than populist values. We return to this below. Seeing that bias yet? It may be a bit unfair to say that, but it's obvious when one ideological group is in power and it's constantly suppressing the other side, the suppressed side will wish for chaos to disrupt the current order. I imagine if you conducted a similar study today, they would find that high chaos individuals are more common on the far left. That said, the whole fake news debate is not a good one. I've seen news and studies that were completely biased, wrong, or both coming from both sides. I've also seen efforts to suppress information those in power didn't want available by labeling it as fake news or conspiracy theories. But with the major dividing line being between the educated and the non-educated, the inclusion of the fake news argument doesn't surprise me. Moving on. Part 4. What do people high in need for chaos want? The previous analysis suggests that education explains some of the variation between low chaos individuals and the rest, and that right-wing ideology explains some of the variance in high chaos categorization. Nonetheless, we do not find a clear pattern that distinguishes high chaos and rebuild with respect to demographics, which raises this question about whether these categories map onto differences in political preferences and behavior. We now turn to this question. These analyses focus on the USA and UK in this section because the Australian and Canadian surveys contained a more limited and non-comparable set of variables. Beginning with political preferences, Table 5 shows regression coefficients for each of the latent profile categories, with low chaos being the excluded category. The items in the rows are the dependent variables that measure policy preferences for each of the regression models. The dependent variables were measured using 5-point Likert agree-disagree scales. The regression models include controls for demographic characteristics, age, gender, race, education, and interaction between education and age, personality traits, and political ideology. So after all that, they say they didn't find a clear link between high chaos, rebuild, and demographics. I'm a little upset they didn't do the same tests in Australia and Canada. I believe that may have been informative, but I'm not going to accuse them of anything. Sometimes it's just a lack of money, time, or both. Moving on. We do not observe a consistent pattern in political preferences across the latent profile categories in the USA and UK. In both countries, individuals in the low chaos category are less likely to agree that immigration should be halted relative to the other categories. There are also no major differences between rebuild and high chaos categories with respect to immigration. Individuals in both of these categories would prefer that immigration be stopped. In both countries, it also appears that those who fall in the rebuild category are more bothered by new lifestyles than are individuals in the high chaos category. In the USA, individuals in the rebuild category are also more likely to question capitalism, while those in the UK are more supportive of the death penalty. Our interpretation of these findings is that those who fall in the rebuild category exhibit enough idealism or principles that are distinct from the full embrace of nihilism apparent in the high chaos profile. I'm going to disagree with them here. In case you didn't know, I'm sure you do, you guys are smart, right and left don't mean the same thing in different countries. They show this by people in the same classification wanting different things. What you're looking at is a disagreement with the current system and the desire to change it. To explain a different way, if you're already struggling, you don't want competition. If you don't think others are receiving the same level of punishment you would, you will call for harsher punishments. These are very simplified examples. While nihilism could be an explanation, I don't believe it is the most accurate one, or at least the most common, or even the root. People don't just become nihilistic, unless they're teenagers. There are usually circumstances that would lead them to believe things can't get better. Moving on. Next, we consider the relationship between the need for chaos latent profile categories and political participation. Table 6 shows regression coefficients for each of the latent profile categories, with low chaos being the excluded category. The items in the rows are the dependent variables that measure political participation for each of the regression models. The dependent variables reflect survey items that asked respondents on a 0 to 10 scale how likely they are to take part in a variety of political activities in the next few years. The regression models include controls for demographic characteristics, age, gender, race, education, and interaction between education and age, personality traits, and political ideology. Consistent with Peterson et al., we find that individuals that fall in the high chaos category are much more likely to say they will take part in an illegal protest, even relative to those in the rebuild category. So yeah, people who don't like the system and don't want to deal with it anymore are very likely to do things the system doesn't agree with or has made explicit rules against. This is what happens when you start to lose the consent of the governed. It's not helped that we're in very politically charged times. Moving on. We're in the home stretch of this study, I promise. Conclusion. The purpose of this study was to explore whether different motivations underlie the characteristic adaptation need for chaos. We replicated previous research in 4 Anglo-Saxon countries. The need for chaos scale forms a unidimensional scale that captures the continuous characteristic adaptations in the Australian, Canadian, the UK, and the USA. We turned the latent profile analysis to investigate whether different subtypes of individuals explained variance in the need for chaos scale. We found evidence that this may indeed be the case, with individuals falling into 4 different latent categories: low chaos, medium chaos, rebuild, and high chaos. The key difference between those in the rebuild and high chaos categories is that rebuilders are less likely to agree with statements supporting destruction for the sake of destruction relative to those that were in the high chaos category. E.g., I get a kick when natural disasters strike in foreign countries. Yada yada yada, we know this, we've been over this, moving on. Across all 4 countries, most people fell in the low chaos categories and few people fell in the high chaos category. But combining the rebuild and high chaos categories showed that there is support for some degree of chaos seeking, around 20% in the 4 Anglo-Saxon countries. Is this something that should be worrying from a normative standpoint? We believe that latent profile analysis helps answer this question. If 20% of a country yearned for violent overthrow of the current system, it would be worrying. But it seems that a considerable fraction of this 20% don't want destruction for the sake of destruction, but rather they imagine rebuilding society's institutions in a way that does not involve violence. We leave aside whether their particular vision is a good one, and simply note that most utopian visions begin with the notion that society must be remade in some fundamental way. So yeah, it doesn't take a large percentage of a population to overthrow a nation, as stated earlier. I get why they're combining the high chaos and want to rebuild groups, but I don't like it. Most rebuilders don't want a burn it all down type in their group. They usually want them in an opposing group so they can point and say, "We can save you from that." Most people don't want violence. It's messy, draining, and always has the possibility of you losing. It's why most people will put up with something until it becomes intolerable. Moving on. We then turn our attention to exploring whether demographic and political characteristics help differentiate who falls in with different latent profile categories. Echoing previous research, we found evidence that chaos seeking tends to be higher among the young, men, and those with less than a college degree. Interestingly, we did not find consistent differences in terms of demographics between the rebuilder and high chaos subtypes. This would suggest that chaos seekers, whether they like destruction for the sake of destruction or not, may be motivated by a sense of marginalization and grievance that exists at high levels in Western society today. Congratulations, you've verified what the most primitive of societies have known for all of human history. Those who crave chaos are more often than not disenfranchised young men. Moving on. We also found that individuals who identify as right-wing were also more likely to fall in the high chaos category. Yet, when we turned our attention to the political preferences of these individuals, the only consistent pattern that emerged was a dislike of immigration. Consistent with Table 8, we do not find much evidence that individuals in the high chaos category are idealistic visionaries who want to dismantle society and political institutions to build a better world. Our evidence was much more consistent with the results of previous research that paints individuals high on the need for chaos scale as nihilists who are only looking out for themselves. In contrast, individuals who fell in the rebuild category did seem to have something approaching a social outlook. They do not like new lifestyles and, in the US, are not fans of capitalism. Perhaps these individuals want to replace established political institutions to make the world a better place, at least their view of what constitutes better. The line in those parentheses is doing an awful lot of work. This is more a modern circumstances thing. At the time this study was done, the right was out of power. It's no wonder they would want to shake up the then current system. As for the immigration versus new lifestyles comparison, you could almost get away with grouping those two together. As stated before, people who feel marginalized do not want more competition. Adding new lifestyles to the mix is also going to be an aggravating factor. Envy is one of the most destructive emotions humans possess. An argument can be made that it has been one of the greatest things holding us back as a species. No one wants to be left behind, replaced, or ostracized. If they feel they are being subjected to any of those things, they are more likely to want to destroy the current system. Moving on. The empirical results of 2 substantive chaos-seeking profiles warrants further comment and speculation given the current political environment and the challenges that populist politicians and causes, such as Donald Trump and Brexit, pose to the established order. populists potentially knock on an open door because Western political systems undersupply political parties with socially conservative and economically left-leaning manifestos. A close look at Table 5 suggests a picture of the Rebuild and the High Chaos members having some characteristics of politically alienated social conservatives, with a larger Rebuilder profile displaying more of these characteristics, e.g. opposition to free market capitalism and immigration or new lifestyles. The supply of candidates and opportunities matters. Results from Table 6 suggest Rebuilders and, in the UK, High Chaos respondents have little interest in traditional political activities. With Brexit as a rebuilding opportunity, change the propensity of Rebuilders to eschew the act of voting and differentiate the two profiles further. These are areas ripe for additional research, given the empirical establishment and cross-national validation of the two chaos profiles presented in this paper. Most of this we've already discussed. I did want to say, this reminds me of why I don't like modern academia. When I was getting my degree, I was told that we should strive to use only modern sources. They gave us a rationale for this that went something along the lines of, modern research is more accurate and fact-based. I will conveniently ignore the fact that our entire mathematical system is based on centuries-old proofs. Ignoring studies older than a decade or two will lead you to forgetting hard-won truths from the past, and leaving you treading old ground confused. This is a subject that can be argued for hours and achieve nothing but making both sides mad. Moving on. Summing up, it is important to recognize that the quest for status and recognition is deeply ingrained in human nature. The findings that thwarted status desires drive a need for chaos, which then activates support for political protest and violence, suggest that a need for chaos may be a key driver of societal change, both currently and historically. In this regard, the present analysis emphasizes that while some simply want to watch the world burn, others want to see a new world rebuilt from the ashes. Thus we observe both nihilists, captured by the High Chaos group, and those who have a purpose, captured by the Rebuilders group. Nonetheless, owing to the destructive force of a high need for chaos, one of the key challenges of contemporary societies is indeed to meet, recognize, and to the extent possible, alleviate the frustrations of these individuals. The alternative is a trail of nihilistic destruction. Why do I feel like this is the scientific equivalent of management offering their employees a pizza party instead of raises? It's like the people conducting this study have never read a history book. But science wouldn't be science if they weren't retreading ground so covered they'd built a road and set up a McDonald's. I can't bash this article too hard. They got really close to understanding something profound and basic. To sum it all up, the reason people usually want to burn down the existing system is because they don't like what it's doing, they don't feel represented by it, and they don't think it can be fixed or fixed easily. Most burn the world types are male, usually young. Many are from the middle class. Also, a large number of angry young men is always a threat to the current system. That last one's not exactly in the study, but it's a basic rule of humans. Finally, we get to the fun part. How can we use this information to build our burn the world down characters? There are a couple of things we can use. First of all, background. If you're anything like me, you've probably spent an unhealthy amount of time researching things for your book that by all rights should land you with a personal FBI agent. Mine's named Sarah. Your characters should get the same treatment. If you want to make a character who wants to burn the world down, you now know how to make them believable to the average person. You also have some ideas on how to make your character more or less sympathetic. You also have some ammo for those pointless Twitter fights when someone inevitably tells you you're wrong, usually from an account that's 12 years old with double or single-digit followers. Do you want to make your vigilante more relatable? You can make the system built against them either because of their status, class, or personage. You can even make it an active oppression. An example, they try to suppress him because of who he is or what he is. Want to make your terrorist more hateable? Make him some spoiled kid that excuses his own violent acts by calling on the plight of others. Have them do things that are out of touch with the group they claim to represent. Have them wear expensive clothes or eat very nice meals, or even have them rub elbows with the people who are causing the problems in the first place. It does sound a bit cliche, but I believe if books are written in the future about our time, you can bet many of the villains are going to be this sort of activist. You now have a good reference point for what would be normal for such a terrorist. This allows you to make characters that feel like outsiders among outsiders. Have the lone terrorist be a woman who uses this fact to throw others off her trail. Don't make it a "we're subverting expectations by having the terrorist be a woman" thing. Have her use her status to throw authorities off, to gain sympathy or even recruit. She would know they would be expecting a man, so don't have her stand up and declare herself Team Rocket style. You can have her manipulate others into acting as a figurehead so she can work from the shadows, like a true mastermind would. This study, while a bit redundant and at times a little biased, gives you a snapshot into the minds of people in fairly modern terms. Our ability to relate our characters to real-world examples makes getting the desired reaction more likely. It's also a nice treat to read these studies and see parallels between characters and real-world examples, but you don't have to write your books to please me. We can also look at this in broader terms, by applying your story's in-world politics. If your character's government is traveling in a bad direction, how likely is your character to want to burn down the system? Is the character benefiting from the current system, and are they frequently enjoying themselves? If so, you might have to work on that sympathy angle. If they're constantly getting stomped into the dirt and robbed by the cops, then they would probably have a very strong desire to burn the system down. Probably a more frantic one than most. Does it make sense for them to have the level of hatred for the system that they do? If your character is going to literal war over parking tickets, it's probably not going to make them feel very sympathetic. However, if the government is burning down their home on a weekly basis, having them try to get signatures for a petition is going to make them look weak. These might seem like strange examples, but trust me, I've seen weirder. Does the character need some qualification, like they're not being honest about what they want? Or are they simply not smart enough to understand that the system is working for or against them? There have been several stories where I couldn't figure out why the character was taking the actions they did. Actions that would be directly against their best interests, and they would be in a position to understand that. If your character is heavily invested in the system, is friends with the people who run it, and has been raised in it, you're really going to need some justification for them wanting to burn it down. This can be something as simple as they want all the power. It could even be vengeance so blindingly petty and ill thought out they have no idea what they're actually doing. But remember, your characters need believable motivations to want to do something as extreme as burning down the world. Lastly, well, not really lastly, there's a lot more you can do with this information. It allows us to differentiate between those who want to burn the system down for relatable reasons and those who want to do it because it's funny. Crazy characters who crave nothing more than destruction shouldn't have relatable motives. You should avoid giving them relatable motives. If your character is a certifiable psychopath, you shouldn't have them give some grand lecture about the rights of marginalized groups, the plight of the rainforest, or any other political ideology without extreme justification. Why justification? Because your psychotic character may just be trying to stir something up if they're a deeper thinker. They're acting as an accelerant to pit one group against another group. But I'm going to state right now, Your psychotic, burn the world down because it's funny character should not have any deeply held beliefs that correspond to modern sensibilities of yourself or your political enemies. Why? Because they're irrational monsters. I get the rationale that, well, my political enemies are monsters and I'm just showing the world that. You're not. You look petty. You appear insulting. Worse, you look like a bad writer that will sacrifice their story and characters for cheap political points. If you do this, you'll run into problems like the writers of The Boys have. If you've watched the show, you'll know that the writers have a particular hatred for the character Homelander. They want to make him everything they hate in their political opposition. Homelander is supposed to be unlikable. In the comics, he's a merciless killer. Well, that's actually complicated. But the writers of The Boys decided to tie Homelander in the show to ideals and talking points associated with their political enemies, which makes a lot of people love him. Had they simply not given him the moral stances they did, or better yet, none at all, many people wouldn't have found him relatable, which again, he's not supposed to be. When you give your villains political motives and assign to them the rationale of your political enemies, people are either going to feel attacked or sympathize with them. If your villain also happens to be fighting against people who represent everything you think is right and proper in your own political movement, then those who sympathize with your villain will champion him. They'll yell "based" and make memes showing your villain as the true hero of the story. You may also find yourself in the political minority and the majority of people sympathizing with your villain while hating your main character, or main characters. I understand that characters can't completely escape the politics of their creators, but it's something we should strive to do. Every human civilization has had different standards. If you went back in time and showed the movie Roots to almost any Roman or pre-Roman civilization around the world, they probably wouldn't relate to it the same way folks in the modern West do. Heck, you could probably get the same result just by going to the other side of the planet. I won't go into the particulars here because I like my channel. This is where writing for your audience comes in. I'm not suggesting you completely gear everything to your audience. What I'm suggesting is you understand your audience and how relatable or understandable your characters are going to be. Let's look at some examples. Many people are probably screaming, "The Joker!" Well, yeah, no. I don't want to. And I'm a little mad at the recent movie that cured his insanity by means of what American prisons are famous for. And that really ruined the character for me. It's also really hard to get a good profile on the Joker, as he's been told and retold so many times by so many people in so many different mediums that someone is sure to get mad at my take. Not that a good trolling isn't a stomping good time, but when looking for low-hanging fruit, you don't go for those that have fallen onto the ground and been stomped into the dirt. The Lich from Adventure Time. This will probably be the only time I reference this show on my channel. The Lich is an immortal being that only wants the destruction of all life in the universe. He's also immortal in the true sense, as he's never actually been destroyed. I'm not counting the recent special. The Lich's motivations are unknown. All we do know is that he wants to destroy all life and he will use everything he can to achieve these ends. He is evil, ancient, and powerful. He has no allies and does not need them. Now, had we ascribed some modern-day politics to him, it would have diminished him as a character. If while on the cusp of destroying someone, he stopped to lecture them on the merits of any political movement, it would have destroyed him as a character. He wouldn't care about such things because he hates all life and should care nothing about how it's lived or organized. If you hate something, the only reason you would care about how it's organized is to better destroy it. If such a being were to advocate for tolerance and acceptance, it opens a psychological quagmire. Does he mean it, or is it a ploy to destroy us? Or did he know we'd see it as a ploy and advocate for the best position for us? Or did he know we'd suspect the ploy and yada, yada, yada? These are games you play with your friends, not the big bad guy of your series. Yes, pulling off a major coup by convincing the heroes and the audience of something just to reveal the bad guy wanted that can be a major win if done right. But focus on the word reveal. This doesn't mean once the battle is won by the heroes go, surprise, the bad guy planned this all along. You have to play a big game of connect the dots. The reader, watcher, or player needs to be able to look back at what they've been through and see it for themselves. It's a very hard thing to do because you need to convince your audience that the heroes are doing the right thing, and then have them do an immediate "oh crap" upon seeing what the villain did. Your reader, watcher, or player has to see this. This also needs to be set up before the reveal, not after. Moving on. Next, let's look into something less apocalyptic. The Knights of the Underhill from George R.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire series. I apologize if I'm bringing up any painful memories about George once again giving us the non-news that he's not releasing the next book. And may George's expansive rear find its way to a writing desk sometime in the next few months. The Knights of the Underhill can be classified as a group who wants to burn the current system down to rebuild it. They don't see the current system as legitimate, and use very un-YouTube-friendly methods to demonstrate it. Let's just say they're very fond of decorating forests. Their motivations are clear. They dislike the leadership of the current system. They don't see it as legitimate. In this case, it would diminish them to participate in wanton savagery. They have a clearly defined goal. They have hearts and minds to win. And to have them act in a way they would know would hurt their cause would make them unrelatable and unsympathetic. If you want to make a rebel group sympathetic, you pretty much have to adopt something along the lines of rules of war. Don't have them act in despicable ways, i.e. burning, pillaging, and performing unscheduled and involuntary procreative activities to the innocent civilians. If someone in their group does this, they must be punished. Rebels are only loved and respected when they are better than the system they're fighting against. Doing normal destabilizing stuff that rebels would do and have done in our own world will make them look the same or worse than the current system they're fighting against. Lastly, let's look at Marvel's Carnage. Just a heads up, I'm not an avid Western comics reader, so I'm going to be a little less detailed here. Cletus Cassidy, otherwise known as Carnage, was raised in an extremely abusive household, but he was also already a psychopath. He got his kicks doing things that could get you committed involving animals. I think he was also kicked down the stairs by his grandmother for doing this. Carnage wants chaos because he thinks it's fun. He will attack everything and everyone he can. He wants to burn down the system not because he's disenfranchised, even though he is. He wants to burn down the system because he can. The system itself doesn't really matter to him. When he's incarcerated, he sees it more as an inconvenience, something getting in between him and all those screamy bags full of fluid he enjoys making leak. In the study we looked over, Carnage would be the reason they controlled for the Big Five character traits. He's the psycho who would want to burn the system down regardless of how it's reformed. He is the outlier incarnate. It's like those funny green text posts that may or may not actually be from scientists about that one rat they're testing with that does weird things. It likes pain, and it does exactly the opposite thing that all the other rats do. It's like a teenager that deliberately gets all the questions wrong on the standardized test because he wants to see what will happen and has a problem with authority. I should also add that Carnage is a very well-liked character, despite him having no redeeming qualities whatsoever. And I suspect that's because he's consistent. He doesn't, as far as I've seen anyway, stop mid-fight to lecture people on political correctness. He doesn't proclaim to his enemies that he fights for any cause other than his own enjoyment. He's a true bad guy. It would also ruin his character to have him mastermind some complex scheme to confuse his enemies. He's not that type of character. Yes, he has some things in common with characters like the Lich. He's an engine of destruction. His motives are at times indecipherable, beyond that he wants to end everyone and everything he can. Just like it would ruin him to make him sympathetic. Yes, he had a traumatic childhood, but he's such an evil creature that no one cares. He is the embodiment of something being born wrong. And that leads me to my conclusion. A good, burn the world down character is true to what they are. They are an extreme character type and should have little room for anything outside themselves. They shouldn't have outside interests, strong opinions, or anything that would conflict with their goals, and should be strayed from their paths with extreme caution. They should be obsessive to the point of, and often beyond, madness. In my opinion, they are best when they're not complex. They desire to burn the system down and to actually act upon it. The desire to burn the system down and actually act upon it doesn't lend itself well to complexity. There are exceptions to this, like the well-to-do person who is trying to overthrow a system, but that's usually more of a rebuild mindset. They don't want to destroy the current system so much as reform it under their leadership. This may sound like a distinction without a difference, but they are two very different character types. And with that, I wish you all good luck.